today, if you think about what these agents are doing, in my view, and this is unfortunate, I think they're essentially automating the work of a junior engineer. So for new grads entering the software engineering field, the number one thing that you got to get good at is, and what that means is that the playing field has shifted and everybody needs to kind of reinvent themselves. I started a company in 2021 called Bloom, and we went through YC and we scaled it to about 2 million users and about 4 million in ARR.
I often hear this new hype about full stack AI.
What we mean by this is that we're not just sort of providing a tool to, these existing employees and these enterprises to do their work, but really we're thinking kind of from the other side of like, how do we actually just automate away the entire job? Or it's like, what are kind of the most gnarly, annoying workflows that these people have to actually go through every day? And how do we just wholesale take that off their hands?
How would you actually build an AI native product today?
So I think I would distinguish a little bit the exercise of trying to build a full stack AI company and the idea of building an AI native product. Most people don't know this, but there's at least 3 companies that are doing 100 million or more in ARR, which have a name that's quite similar to ChatGPT and just have an app out there in the App Store. So there's a lot of opportunity, obviously.
If we see that junior developers are not needed anymore for writing the small module code from which you essentially get the experience to learn about a bigger system, where are we headed with this? Hey everyone, welcome back to our series on how to stay relevant. And today we're going to explore how software engineering is evolving. And we're joined by someone who is living the future. Sam Young is a YC founder, engineer, and CTO at Nova, where he's building AI native tools for developers. But here's the twist. Sam left a profitable 4 million in ARR company to start over. Why? Because he saw where software was headed and he wanted to be there early. Today we'll talk about how dev workflows are changing, what full stack AI products look like, and what's the architecture behind them. And yes, there's also a live coding demo coming up. Let's dive in. So first of all, thank you so much for joining. This is fabulous. I've been really meaning to talk to you because I see you as one of the young founders, modern software developers in the field who's built like a couple of companies already. You came from YC, you built Bloom, right? With YC Winter 21 batch with the accelerator program. And you had 4 million ARR at that time. You left that, you started something of your own from scratch, and you're building into the AI agentic market again, right? So I think before we get into the workflows and the modern engineering, software engineering practices and code, could you tell us a little bit about your story and why walk away from a working company? Could you, that will be really good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Prasen, for having me on the show. Really excited to kind of talk more about AI agents and where software engineering is going. As you mentioned, I started a company in 2021 called Bloom. So started up with a guy called Sunny, who was a very good friend of mine, still is. And we went through YC as you mentioned, Winter 21. Bloom was an investing app, right? So it was a very different space than I'm tackling today. It was actually an investing app for young people, and we sort of taught people how to invest. So the problem we were going after was that you don't really learn how to invest in schools or university or anything like that. And so people are kind of thrust into the job market and they start making some money and they don't know what to do with it. We thought that might have been one of the factors that was responsible for the wealth gap in America. So we attempted to kind of solve it with this investing product. And we scaled it to about 2 million users and about 4 million in ARR. We became profitable in kind of early 2024 as well. And as you mentioned, I did actually end up leaving, right? And so the company's still running, it's still profitable, but I started a new company last year. And I always kind of tell the story of like why I did this. There's a few kind of reasons that all came together. The first thing was that, to be honest, like Bloom was not going to become a $1 billion company, right? So it was a good business. It was a lot of fun. We were serving users and doing something real, but it just didn't really have the quality of becoming something really big. And when I first got into startups, I guess I didn't mention this, but I actually left school at UC Berkeley to start that company. When I first got into startups, I wanted to build something really big, something generational, right? Bloom just again was not going to quite become that. So that was the first piece. Second piece was that from a technology perspective, I was just looking around at all the AI research that was happening. I was living in San Francisco, so I was quite plugged into all this stuff. All the AI startups that were popping up left and right. And I sort of this feeling of being in like 1998 and not working on the internet essentially. So I essentially felt like, okay, I need to go work on the internet, if you will. And obviously that kind of led me to this AI situation. The last thing was that a very good friend of mine at the time, Emma, who's now my co-founder and CEO at Nova, so that's the new company, was just kind of exploring this idea of AI coding agents. So it's very, very early. There's, essentially just an idea on a napkin. But actually, at that time, she and a friend had essentially built the leading coding agent on the Swebench benchmark, which is kind of the main benchmark for coding agents. So I was obviously incredibly impressed with that. And Emma's basically the smartest person I know. So, oftentimes I think in startups, you should just follow smart people, and that often leads to good places. So, obviously we got together, we started talking about it, and ended up just being kind of a good time to start something new.
Awesome. Great to hear your story, man. Like you've done a lot at a young age. And I think the reason I want to talk to you, Sam, especially today is we did an episode with Kelsey Hightower, and I think his insight resonated a lot with the folks who are trying to understand what changed with software engineering, right? And how the market is evolving. How do you kind of educate yourself to ride the wave of AI and agentic that's out there right now, right? So I want to be a bit more practical in this episode and explore like how did we come to where we are right now. It started in the 60s with software crisis. Then it kind of went towards object oriented programming. Then we saw cloud computing. And today we see a lot of agentic and AI related coding practices and modern software engineering practices, AI assisted development, right? That's what we see in today's world. So I want to like get into the depth of like, how did we come to where we are? And what changed in software engineering fundamentally? If you can actually shed some light on that.
Yeah, so a guy I respect a lot, Andre Karpathy, who many folks may know, um, had a great tweet in 2023 where he basically said, like, English is the new programming language. And it was obviously a bit provocative, but I think I very much identify with that, where, essentially we've gone from a world where, I mean, again, Prasen, you mentioned the 60s where people were using punch cards and all of this stuff. And then we, built more modern developer tools. Of course, we had, operating systems, and then we moved towards object-oriented programming with cloud computing. Now, basically anybody, or their mother can spin up kind of a server and go deploy the web application. And even more recently, you have kind of tools like Expo. That's something I used a lot back in the day. And other much more kind of innovative dev tools, or Supabase and some of these sort of companies that are essentially making it even easier for developers to get started and build something. And so I think we're really just in the next evolution of that, albeit a very, very big evolution, right? So we've essentially moved towards a world where anybody who knows English, or really any other language that LLMs can understand, can actually build something. Now, of course, we're at the early stages of this. So the question of whether what they build is actually useful, whether it works, whether it's secure, there's a lot of open questions there, right? But it's not unlike when the internet first started or when cloud computing came out. I mean, there were a lot of gaps, there's a lot of holes, right, that need to be filled in. And I think you just have to imagine a little bit about what the world looks like in 2, 3, 4, 5 years instead of where we are today, just right at the beginning of the revolution. And the last thing I'll say here is that this is very much the idea that we founded our company on as well, right? So I didn't introduce too much what we're doing at this company, but essentially we're building AI coding agents for SAP. So we're deep in the enterprise, looking at a lot of these like gnarly legacy code, custom code, developments that are in these, enterprise systems like SAP. Um, and really, our view on this is that the cost of building software and implementing software and customizing and whatnot is really going to come down by like 1,000x in the next 10 years, right? And that's across the board. So, I mean, obviously, we believe that there's going to be a lot more software built as a result of that. And so that puts us in quite a good position if we can get ourselves in there. But that's my general feeling about this as well, is that, there's going to be so much more software. There's going to be so much more work to do, so many more things that, humans can accomplish with software. And, there's this incredible number, which I think only 0.3% of the world is actually, technically a software developer or like a, trained software engineer. So just imagine what the rest of the world will be able to do, right? It's not like these people are not creative. I think that we're really just right at the beginning of this wave, and it's going to be, absolutely massive.
So, what does modern software engineering actually look like right now?
So today, where we are sitting here in 2025, right, June of 2025, I always have to say the month because every 3 months there's something crazy that happens,
Yeah.
and the paradigm shifts, right? But sitting here in June of 2025, I would say that in professional software development, we're still kind of in a human-driven workflow where these AI agents and these tools. Well, I kind of said right there, they're really tools at the moment, right? So what that means is that, end of the day, a human is still going to be the one, largely speaking, driving a lot of the core development, making the key architectural decisions and things like that. We're not quite at the point, I think, where, at least in professional settings, these agents and these AI, models can just make those decisions for us. That being said, it is pretty clear that we're trending in that direction. So, I don't know, I don't have an internal timeline, but I believe in the next 2 to 5 years, we'll be moving from a kind of human-driven development architecture to an agent-driven development architecture, where the agents will actually be the ones leading these projects and leading the developments, and humans will be there to kind of supplement them. And you'll almost just be assigned tasks in Jira or whatever it may be by an agent, and then you'll go do that. But to be very clear, I don't think we're quite there today. I mean, I think some of the most innovative companies in the world are kind of pushing on that frontier. So I'm certain folks are experimenting, but what I see day to day when I talk to kind of the smartest software engineers I know, I think a lot of it is still quite human in the loop and human centric.
Even though there's human in the loop right now, what are the layers that people are working with right now? For instance, you have tools like Cursor and Copilot. You have infrastructure automation that is added for that. You have implementation practices already kind of out there to deploy some of these things, right? So what does that mean from a lens of software engineering?
Absolutely. And I mean, we see a lot of this in our work, right? So as we work with enterprises and these large corporations looking to, frankly, modernize their legacy systems, there is a huge amount of data and a huge amount of knowledge that's trapped in, these legacy systems or just the enterprise at large, right? So if you think about a large company like Microsoft, for example, I mean, I don't even know how many lines of code Microsoft probably has in their system, but it's not the case that you can just open up Copilot and suddenly start being productive, right? So a lot of it is around what context do you actually give these models and give these agents in order to enable them to do their best work, right? So what we've seen, within ourselves as a startup, right, is that we've actually engineered our code base to be more friendly for these agents to navigate. So to your point, Prasen, we use Cursor, we use Windsurf. I think some guy on our team uses Klein. So people are experimenting with these different tools and these different ideas even in this case. But what we've tried to do is instead of simply writing the code and calling it a day, we're actually creating more documentation. And a lot of that documentation, for example, is created by these AI models and these AI agents, and we'll kind of leave it there actually in the code base. And then that way, in the future, agents that go and look at the code base could go and like read the documentation in addition to reading the code. And there's like certain ways that you do this, right? There's different techniques. But the advantage of using something like Cursor is they do, for example, like auto indexing of the code base for you. So they actually take care of a lot of these things that you don't you would normally worry about from a context perspective. I think that's also why it's basically the fastest growing startup ever, to my knowledge. So it is incredibly useful. And I think again, as I mentioned, every 3 months the paradigm shifts and there's new best practices. So for me, it's actually even hard to keep up.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I often hear this new hype about full stack AI. A lot of people are investing in full stack AI companies where someone comes in and kind of like augments a lot of the workforce um, related personas with a product. For instance, legal, right? Let's say legal systems. I can actually create an AI agent which could augment a lot of the work that was done by these legal folks. And I create a full stack company around it. I hear a lot of hype around that. What is it exactly? And is it just hype or does it really add value to the current world?
So if you think about software over the last like 40 years, more or less, especially in the enterprise, right, and especially in kind of these B2B workflows, I would say that a lot of it resembles a tool. right? So it is kind of this thing you go to help you do your work. And, at best, maybe it makes you 10, 20, maybe even 30% more productive at what you do. So if you think about something even like Salesforce, which is an incredible company, right? Um, it is essentially a tool at the end of the day. And of course, there are really a platform, so a set of tools that, help salespeople track their leads, follow up, kind of, measure revenue and success and things like this. But it's not really doing the job of the salesperson, right? It's not kind of automating, the thing that the salesperson needs to do. So what we mean by when we hear about these full stack AI companies, which personally I believe in a lot, right? I mean, I'm a little bit biased, given the space that I'm in. But what we mean by this is that we're not just sort of providing a tool to these existing, let's say, workers or employees in these enterprises to do their work, but really we're thinking, kind of from the other side of like, how do we actually just automate away the entire job? And obviously, in most of these industries, we're still quite far away from like actually automating away the entire job. And so maybe it looks more like, well, automating away, some of the people who are within the organization, and maybe those people can do something else, right? Or it's like, what are kind of the most gnarly, annoying workflows that these people have to actually go through every day, and how do we just wholesale take that off their hands, right? Or at the bare minimum, make it again a kind of agent-driven workflow around this automation. So sitting here today, I think there's actually two companies that announced big funding rounds recently. Interesting enough, both of them are like sort of fellow portfolio companies, and that our investors are also large investors of them. So one is Decagon, and so Decagon is a AI customer support company where essentially they're able to automate away most of the actual work that a customer support agent does, and they're by far the best product on the market. So that's a situation where historically you might have tools for customer support where maybe you can, set up automations to resolve tickets, that are older than 1 or 2 days. But Decagon will go in and respond to the customer. It'll actually pull data from your CRM, from Stripe, and from these other sources, and it'll figure out how to actually resolve the customer's query. You can even give it write access to some of these things. And so that's a completely different paradigm that we're thinking about. And the reason that these companies are able to fetch such high valuations is because if you think about it, the work that they're capturing is so valuable, right? From an economic perspective. If you can automate away, like I don't even know how many percentage points of the customer support market, which globally I believe is like $150 billion a year, you're going to build a pretty big company, right? So I personally believe a lot in this stuff. I think, as these models get better and as these products continue to deliver more automation, it's pretty clear where it's headed, which is that you're going to capture a lot of the economic value that is currently getting captured by these incumbents and by these kind of legacy players.
So if you get a bit more tactical about this, right? And there's a developer out there who wants to know more around this. How would you actually build an AI native product today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I would distinguish a little bit the exercise of trying to build a full stack AI company and the idea of building an AI native product, because I believe there's a lot of things you can do that are or that you can build that are AI native products that are not truly full stack AI companies, right? So one example is like all of these sort of AI personal assistants that, apps that exist in the App Store. Most people don't know this, but there's at least 3 companies that are doing 100 million or more in ARR, which are not ChatGPT, which have a name that's quite similar to ChatGPT and just have an app out there in the App Store. So there's a lot of opportunity, obviously. And you've also seen a lot of kind of, frankly, quite very young people. I think one extremely successful example is a company called Cal AI, which is essentially an AI assistant for tracking your, calorie intake. As far as I don't personally use this, but it's actually a 17-year-old kid that founded this, right? And he scaled this company from 0 to 30 million in ARR in like something around a year, or maybe like a year and a half. And it was him and like a 12-person team or something like that. So to me, that's not technically a full stack AI company per se, but it's an incredible product and an incredible company that this guy has built in a very short period of time. So in terms of how you should build that, I mean, end of the day, it's not any different than maybe what YC or others say is a good way to start a company, which is to identify a pain point in the world that you or people or people that you find have, and think about how you can maybe use technology to solve that pain point, right? So if we just take Cali as an example, I mean, calorie tracking is a big deal for people who, who are into like fitness and just generally, for most people. And so essentially they thought about this like, well, now with AI, we can actually just like take a photo of the food and, approximate like how many calories are in this food based on, what the different ingredients are. If you have like a pancake and there's some, there's like three pancakes, there's some maple syrup, there's some blueberries or whatever. Cal AI will actually tell you like, okay, so, I see like 17 blueberries and that's like roughly this many calories. And then it'll give you, the kind of, the macro breakdown as well, right? So I think it's a really brilliant way of like kind of solving that problem. And obviously they've been really good at marketing and getting it out there as well. So that's an example of like, kind of starting with the problem statement and building a product around that. I think for full stack AI companies, it's maybe one level, one level deeper, if you will, which is to say that a lot of these jobs that people do are not actually things that people in Silicon Valley know anything about. As just one example, we're building coding agents for SAP, right? And I did not know anything about SAP until last year, um, and I didn't even realize that there's on the order of $100 or $200 billion a year being spent on SAP consultants. So our first reaction was like, okay, so what are these consultants actually doing, right? Like what, we need to go learn about this. And so we found that, whatever consultants we could find, we flew around to every SAP conference we could get ourselves into, and we just tried to learn. So I think what I'm getting at is that for a lot of these kind of like full stack AI companies, the right place to start is just to learn and to understand like what are these people actually doing? Is there something that they're doing that can actually be automated with AI? Or is it an area which is much harder to automate? So again, in our context, what we're really focused on is essentially the developers within these consulting firms, right? So we're looking to automate the creation and the modernization of custom code within the SAP system, which is of course a prime application of AI coding agents. But also, there's a lot of other people in these consulting firms. There are, kind of like business people. There's like functional people. There's, enterprise architects and folks who are doing things besides just writing code and testing code and whatnot. And we think that a lot of those functions are probably harder to automate today, because when the customer goes to a consulting firm for advice, like they're looking for a particular person to give them advice, right? It's not the case that like an AI giving them the same advice is even the same experience. So that's a lot of what we think about, and what our peers who are building these types of companies are thinking about is like, is there work which is actually more of, let's say, a commodity, which if we can do it faster and cheaper and better, like the customers are just going to be happier? Or are these roles maybe more customer facing or more kind of people oriented, which makes it a lot more difficult to automate, in my view, in the near term.
Got it. Got it. So let's kind of try to see that in action, Sam, if you don't mind. Like, could you walk us through a demo or show us like live how to build a small example of what that application would look like? And I think people would get a lot of value from it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So happy to share that real quick. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so I'm going to do something really simple in the interest of time. But you can use tools like Cursor and Windsurf and these other sort of IDs. But actually, recently, Claude has essentially built this artifacts feature where it can write code and like basically show it to you in the browser as well. So I'm going to go ahead and show this as a simple case where essentially you have, in this case, an LLM, and actually has certain tools as well to render the code and whatnot. Where it's going to create a very basic application. We're going to go through that, and we'll make a few edits, right? And I'll kind of show the process of interacting with these models to create this code. By the way, I'm not the greatest vibe coder in the world by any means. I think there's like many folks who are like way better at this stuff. But hopefully this just introduces the tools. So I've written a real quick description of what we want to build here, which is maybe to set the stage. Like I used to run this consumer app, Bloom, right, as I mentioned. And a big thing for us was measuring like customer retention. So in any sort of subscription product, you sign up a customer, but they have to kind of keep paying you for you to keep getting revenue out of them, right? So, we actually built all these internal tools that let us track this. And actually, quite an annoying piece was, in fact, building things like the front end and the charts and things like this. Nowadays, it's pretty clear you just don't need to do that. You can basically get Claude or any of these models to do that for you. So I just want to show that as an example because it's an interesting case. So you can see I'm asking Claude here to create a React application that displays a chart, which shows subscription app users' revenue retention by cohort. So again, revenue retention means like for a given user or a given group of users, like how much revenue are we retaining from them, or do they continue to pay us over time? For the sake of simplicity, I asked it to make up some mock data. But I made sure to emphasize that I want to see these cohorts kind of layered.
And this would be an actual live real like React app that'll be built to show you all the charts and stuff with whatever your requirements are. I see.
Precisely. Yeah. So you can sort of see the agent, or in this case, it's Claude working here. Um, and essentially it's starting to actually write this app. It's starting to build out the UI. And look, granted, this is a pretty simple application, so I'm pretty sure it's just going to one-shot it, which essentially means to just get it right on the first try. But let's see, and maybe we can make some edits based on what it comes up with. Okay, so that's pretty cool. As you can see, literally in like 20 seconds, I don't know if anybody's counting, you can sort of see this application show up here. And again, the Claude artifacts feature. So this is basically a feature that Claude has now where you can actually see the result of like a React application. And so here's the code, right, that it wrote, and here's that application. So maybe what I want to do here is I actually wanted to change like the y axis here to show the actual revenues. So say, okay, this is good. Can you actually? So what I've asked it now is essentially to make an improvement, right? Very much like when you are developing something with a friend, you might you might ask them to like change something in order to kind of enhance your application. And the way Claude does this is actually pretty interesting. You can see it visualizing this the UI is it's literally editing the code directly. So it's doing essentially what you would do as a human, of kind of removing that code and then editing it as I've asked it to do. So here it's kind of continue to go. It's kind of interesting. Every time it makes an edit, it kind of renders a second as well. But so this is great. I mean, you can see that it's literally making, like I think dozens of edits really across the application in order to get me what I asked for. And this works quite similarly to if you go to Cursor as well and these other agents to do this. But you can imagine this extends, quite well into actually even more complex applications if your instructions are very clear and if you give Claude the right context. So one thing you can do in Cursor, for example, is you can actually like tag files, right? So just like if I were to send, a ticket to one of my engineers and say like, hey, can you take a look at this? I might tell them like, hey, where's the code that you need to look at? You can do that in Cursor as well. You can tag these files, you can tag different artifacts, and that's essentially the context that Cursor gets for what to do. So here you can see that Claude is finished. And it looks like, yeah, it's now giving me the kind of revenue numbers rather than the kind of percentage retention. So just like I asked, it's able to make that edit. And it looks like, Claude even dreamed up, it does this quite often, kind of adding some stuff that you didn't even directly ask for, but it actually even dreams up the kind of highest revenue cohort. So I guess that would be June 2024 at Bund 5, apparently. So pretty cool. It came up with the total revenue, at month 5 across all cohorts and the kind of growth rate, I suppose, between the cohort sizes. So again, in a real situation, I might plug this into some real data. And here it even came up with some key insights that I'm sure was just hard coded, but is actually pretty cool because the AI basically came up with.
So this kind of like goes back to writing code for you, right? I mean, you came up with an application, you had your requirements. I need like X, Y, Z. Based on that, please write me a boilerplate code that actually will represent my use case. And a lot of the validation that comes from PRD, like verify a requirement definition to actual code writing to figuring out what the actual implementation would look like. All of that is taken care, which is great, right? My question, I think, though, is when you're building a live application for an industry or like for any particular use case that's out there, would you use like this written code directly in your application? How does it work for you? Like, are you actually using the code generated by Claude or Cursor for the application that you guys are building?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the short answer is absolutely, right? I mean, I would say that even within our code base, and we're a new company, so like, we've kind of had the benefit of being sort of AI native from the beginning. And of course, we're like a coding agent company. So, obviously I mandate that all our engineers are using Cursor and these other types of tools. At a high level, I was just about to say that I think probably 70 to 75% of the actual code lines in our product or in our applications are actually generated by Cursor and these other tools. So essentially the LLMs, right? And it's not to say that, we just let these agents run wild and output whatever they want. As I mentioned earlier, I think we're still at the stage where these processes are very much human driven. So again, a guy I look up to a lot, Andre Karpathy, he had a great talk at YC Startup School, I think like a week ago. And he essentially mentioned something which I think was quite, poignant and profound, which is that, if you go to Cursor and you just ask it to one shot you your whole application and it gives you like a 10,000 line diff, that's actually not very useful, right? Because you don't know what's in the diff. You don't know what it does. You have to go and test it. You do all these things. Like it doesn't actually necessarily save you that much time at the end because probably most of those 10,000 lines are wrong, right? So what we're really doing is we're like collaborating with these AIs. And to your point, Prasen, we're iterating on the PRDs. And then once we are satisfied with the PRD, we're asking it to start creating the data models. And then once we're satisfied with the data models, we move on to kind of the application layer and so on and so forth. It's this very collaborative process where over time we're kind of checking what the agent does, in much smaller chunks, right? So we're not getting 10,000 line diffs. Maybe it's 200 line diffs or 300 line diffs. And we're approving it, we're editing it manually, we're testing as we go, etc. And actually, as you think about how we are building our coding agents for SAP in this case, it's very much the same way, right? Where we're not just trying to generate in one shot the entire, let's say SAP application. We've actually built all these different tools that allow us to validate the code, that allow us to test the code, allow us to like actually, click around the browser even and utilize the apps and things like that, which are developed. And that's what enables us to actually deliver efficiency rather than just trying to do the whole thing.
So you're basically building modules and that you can test and play with, and then you connect them essentially in the end to create the full stack application. And I think some of that code probably would be written by your AI assisted tools. Good. Okay, so if I am a new grad and I am entering the tech field right now, this actually does resonate quite a bit, right? Like just from the overall development that you were showing, right? And you're talking about like how people need to create different modules and things like that. So if I am a new grad and I'm entering the field just now, what should I really learn to be a modern software engineer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing is that the fundamental, again, if you go back to what I said earlier, where I believe these processes today are very human driven and it takes taste, it takes expertise, it takes, experience really a lot of time to actually drive these processes forward. I would say that a lot of things that people probably should be doing are the same, right? So still learning kind of the core software engineering fundamentals, building side projects and applications on their own, doing the internships and just getting exposed to real world experience is crucial, right? Because if anything, we're seeing today an even bigger gap between those who are, perhaps very inexperienced and unable to really, develop things of their own, and those who are more experienced and, have built things end to end, have like been through real software development life cycles and are able to, let's say, even manage people, right? Because if you think about what these agents are doing, like these coding agents, in my view, and this is unfortunate for obviously a lot of folks today, is that I think they're essentially automating the work of a junior engineer, right? So a lot of what junior engineers are doing is they're taking tasks that are given to them, which are typically, not ridiculous in terms of difficulty or scope, and they're executing on exactly that, and they'll report back, and then they'll submit a PR. Then their manager, the senior engineer, will submit some feedback and go back and forth. But nowadays, we can decrease that cycle by just asking the Cursor agent to do that work, and then I will work with the Cursor agent rather than working with, for example, a junior engineer. And so what that really, hints towards me is that, there's two elements. One is like, again, core software engineering fundamentals, the ability to actually just build things and develop that agency, that authority. But the second piece, which is quite obvious from this conversation, is being able to use these AI tools, right? So again, I gave the example of Cal AI earlier, which was basically largely built by one kid who's 17, I think he's 18 now, and scaled to 30 million in ARR, millions and millions of users, right? I think what you really saw there was a guy who basically mastered both, right? Who was not only a great engineer. I mean, I think that guy started coding when he was like 11, so obviously a little bit of a head start. But he clearly understood how to build these things and how to scale them. But in addition, he kind of mastered quite early on like how do you use these AI tools to accelerate this development, right? And to actually do the work of 40 people with just like 5 or 10 people. And not only did he do that himself, but he was able to kind of broaden that team and expand the knowledge to other people as well. So I think that was really what he was able to do quite well, in addition to many other things, right? But really, I think that's the two key sort of skill sets, and it is actually quite a pertinent conversation because my brother, my younger brother, actually just graduated college from UC Berkeley, and so he's incidentally going to work at OpenAI. But I basically told him, many, many times now. Like, dude, the number one thing that you got to get good at, I know you're a good programmer, you're a good coder or whatever, but like the number one thing you got to get good at now is using these AI tools, right? This is like clearly the future. It's really what you got to lean into. And now he's starting to kind of pick that up as well. But I really think that, both of these are quite critical if you want to get ahead in this
Got
next
it.
wave.
Got it. So I think it kind of comes back to maybe prompt engineering, understanding how to prompt a system and create meaningful interfaces, whether it is an application, a module, a code, or something else, right? And I think the second thing probably that you talked about is kind of system design, right? Okay, I know how to write boilerplate code. I know how to create a module, but I don't know how to put together a system with it, right? An actual entire application. And that brings you down
Exactly.
to the understanding of the software fundamentals. So that is really important. Even in my company, we sort of do this. Um, we have people who understand AIML, but we need the information or the knowledge from people to build an existing scalable enterprise application with it, right?
Mhm.
And that requires you to
Yeah.
have this holistic understanding of how to build softwares. It can't be so like, right? You can build an application just like that, but creating an enterprise grade application with all of that and with a lot of security practices around it is going to be quite challenging. And I think the tool fluency is definitely true. I agree. Learning Cursor, Bolt, Lovable, these kind of tools out there, or even like generating code with Claude and GPT, is really essential. um, and I don't know. I think that that's kind of like the question they have though, right? Like if we see that junior developers um, are not needed anymore for writing the small module code from which you essentially get the experience to learn about a bigger system, to build this whole design around the system and architecture and create an enterprise grade product and with scale and all of that, right? Um, if they're not able to learn and if they don't no longer needed for the work that they were actually needed for, um, where are we headed with this? Like, where is this actually heading? And where are we going to see an intersection of either a bigger opportunity or a big problem?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think there's a lot of people a lot smarter than me who are thinking about this. And a lot of people are quite worried about this as well. I mean, I do think that it goes back to what is the most important thing in tomorrow's world, right? Is it sort of intelligence or is it agency? And I think it's really agency is what it comes down to. Intelligence is being commoditized as we speak, and these model providers are spending tens of billions of dollars a year
Mhm.
trying to get to the next level of intelligence. And as I mentioned, like I think in 2 or 3 years, like we will look quite different. Um, just in terms of where the base models even are in terms of intelligence. So of course that's concepts that you and I are thinking about as we build our companies. But I think for young people, what that really hints to is like this ability to just go and do things, right? And I think the CEO of YC, Gary Tan, tweets about this a lot. But he's really, I think his saying is like you can just do things. It turns out you can just do things. And I think that's more true today than ever, right? Again, if you look at the 17-year-old kid who built a $30 million company in his like parents' garage essentially in a year, I mean, that really speaks to what's possible in today's world if you just go out and you kind of let go of these assumptions and really try something. And it's not to say that's easy. I think that this guy is incredibly smart, and I respect that guy a lot. But most people are not going to be able to do it, and I don't think like entrepreneurship is really for everyone either, and that's what kind of concerns me. But at the same time, I do think the barrier to entry is lower, right? And there's, you can learn things much faster thanks to these tools. You can build things much faster thanks to these tools. And, we're not on the same playing field we were 10 years ago or 20 years ago for that matter. Um, I heard an older entrepreneur speak about this at some talk in San Francisco, and he was like, when I got started, like there was no YC, there was no internet even. You couldn't just go and like look up how to start a company. Like I had to look around for 2 months to find a lawyer that would like help me incorporate the company, right? As like calling law firms left and right. So if you just think about that compared to today, when there's like literally companies where you can click a button and incorporate your company, we've gone so far in terms of the tool stack and like these tools, right, that enable us to create these companies and do great work. But the piece that's always there that's always in I guess the minds and the hearts of these great entrepreneurs is agency and kind of that drive, right? And obviously the hard work too. So I think what that really means to me is also that the world will get a lot more competitive,
Mhm.
right? There's going to be a lot more probably companies being funded, and also many companies that are starting that don't even need funding, because you don't need to hire 5 engineers to build your like simple SaaS product anymore. You can just do it for the most part if you're a decent developer. And what that means is that, yeah, I mean, for basically every startup, every late stage company, and every public company, even, like, I think the playing field has shifted, and everybody needs to kind of reinvent themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I do agree with that so much, genuinely, because I personally have seen the evolution as well. And I think over the years, software engineering was never how we started, right? It evolved over the years. In the 60s, it was a crisis to create and punch code and like then kind of go from there to create an operating system, which essentially will let you create like first of all, it was a central system where all the code kind of lived in there. And now we're seeing the similar central system with AI, right? As it's sort of like the models are basically being added in a central place, and the decentralization of that will happen at some point where you will see your own GPTs installed in your phone and stuff like that, or smaller systems like that. But I think that decentralization of like the code and software development happened over time, and we evolved slowly, and every stage and every transition was quite interesting and challenging at the same time. I'm sure this transition that we're about to see will also evolve in a really positive change. And I think we are definitely optimistic about it being in this space. I have no doubt about that. But I think over the next couple of years or the next 3 years, I would say we need to play a role to understand how to navigate the young generation or folks who are just coming out of school, right? And how do we actually help them out in a better sense, so that they're not in a panic mode, but they're more like um, understand the opportunity to disrupt the market even better, right? And that's kind of like where
Yeah, yeah.
I am trying to maybe give this advice to people who are just coming out of school or about to create value in their respective verticals, right? It's not about understanding every framework, right? You don't need to know everything about software engineering from day one. But for now, if you can guide the system, machine, um, build systems, stay curious, understand what problem you're working on, and learn and keep learning about the new tools and the fundamentals at the same time, and create the design within the tool fluency, right? I think that'll help you to stay relevant in the market. And essentially, you will reach a stage where you would know what to do. And you would probably see a transition that has already disrupted the market around that.
Yeah, and maybe just add one thing, because I do feel like I'm being a little bit doomer in my prior kind of description of this issue. I do want to add on a positive note, and I think I glanced over this very briefly, but it is becoming much easier to learn things, right? I mean, as I mentioned, I didn't know anything about SAP until last year. And frankly, I think without these AI tools, we would be nowhere near where we are today. With our understanding of the market of these, of the systems, right, and of the kind of the technology that powers SAP. So that's obviously in my experience, but I think that to your point, Christine, for new grads entering the software engineering field who are interested in computer science, like this model of sitting through 4 years of school of a classroom and kind of very iteratively going through this doesn't entirely make sense to me either. I mean, obviously, I'm biased since I didn't actually go through that in large part, but I really believe that especially if folks have more time on their hands, that they can really experiment more with like alternative ways of learning, and utilizing these tools for helping them learn. I mean, if anything, that's probably one of the most valuable skills is using the tools and using these AI models to help you learn faster. Because as I mentioned, at the end of the day, if you're going to go on and build things, and whether in software or otherwise, like the biggest thing is kind of learning how to do it
Yeah,
and
yeah.
actually going through that experience. And I think that these AI tools enable you to do that much faster, and you're seeing examples of that all over, right? And that's also why, in my view, why companies are being built so much quicker too. It's not like everybody suddenly just woke up and became a lot smarter,
Yeah.
right? It's like they're utilizing these tools correctly to learn about their prospective
Yeah,
markets, to build products, to iterate, etc.
100%. And at the same time, if you have enough depth around it, right, it will take you longer. Yes, you definitely need to learn about the tools. Yes, it will assist you to work faster, optimize a lot of things that you're doing right now. But if you keep on doing it until you find an interesting problem and go to the depth of it, right? And also the depth of the technology in itself. You'd be at a much better place in the long run, because things change, things evolve. But if you have the fundamental understanding, I think you have a better chance of succeeding in this field, because the core of understanding a value proposition, a problem, and like working on top of it, that will never change, or that will never evolve. That is how the all the beautiful companies have been built. But great, thanks, Sam. That was fantastic. I think it was a really fun chat, coming from you, coming from somebody who's actually built companies in the modern world, right? Someone who's done the YC journey. That's quite interesting, really, for people to know about. And I think someone who's actually working in the market right now to build AI coding agents for SAP. I'm really looking forward to like seeing actually what you do next. And thank you so much for this chat.
Perfect. Thank you, Prasen, for having me, and it's been great.
I hope that was interesting to all of you, and the chat really gave you some insights that you can work on. When it comes to staying relevant, there's so many topics that we can explore, and I will come back with such amazing episodes. If that was of interest to you, please tune in. Until then, have a good one.